Hi, it's Alistair at Electric Scotland. It is me doing my usual weekly introduction to my newsletter, this time for February the 8th, 2019. Okay, the news stories for this week. I'm starting off with, amid cries of traitor, Canada's Trudeau set for ugly election. It says, in contrast to more gentle exchanges in previous years, angry citizens slammed Trudeau for bungling the construction of pipelines, breaking promises to respect the right of Indigenous groups, ignoring a pledge to balance the budget, and allowing too many migrants into Canada. So that's sure a big difference to a couple of years back, and the elections are due for October this year. Okay, so next story is drones mapping of Canada and Sanday is a world first. It says NTS said Canada and Sanday in the Small Isles had been the subject of the most detailed mapping exercise ever undertaken of any islands in the world. So as it's a world first, it's worth a read. That's what I always figure. If it's a world first, let's read it. Millionaire American minister buys 15th century Highland castle. It says the widowed American philanthropist, the 17th Baroness of Lochiel, is reportedly going to use the former stronghold as a holiday home. Then Scotland's debt to forgotten Belize lumberjacks. It says the story of how forestry workers from Central America travel 5,000 miles to Scotland to help the war effort has been largely forgotten. Really interesting wee story, that. And I never even knew they came here, so there you go. You learn something new every day. Next story is behind closed doors. The EU has abolished the little democratic oversight it had. It says at the recent European Foundation paper, Behind Closed Doors shows EU decision making, never democratic by any standards, has in the last decade become even less accountable and transparent. Which is again one of the major reasons I want us out of the EU, to be honest. I mean, why would you want a dictatorship? Next story is dismay at raft of taxes in budget deal with the Greens. It says business leaders in Scotland say they've been left humiliated and dismayed by the Scottish Government over the suite of new taxes unveiled in last week's budget. Yeah, well, you're going to come to a highly taxed place. Scotland's a place to come, unfortunately. New organisation set up to gauge IndyRef support. It says a new polling and research organisation has been set up by former SNP Deputy Leader Angus Robertson to examine attitudes towards Scottish independence. If he does an honest job, I think that would be a really interesting site to look at. So I've given you the link to read that story and see how they get on over the next few months. The difficulties of delivering healthcare in Scotland's far north. It says plans to tackle staff shortages in key areas across the NHS in Scotland have been delayed again. I think it's worth reading these stories because also it gives you a picture of how challenging it is for Scotland to be an independent country, because so much of what it has to cover is very expensive. So if you've got rural areas, I mean, they're costing a fortune to look after. So Scotland's always going to be at a disadvantage economically, given the cost structure of the country. Then the next story is the Hebridean Dark Skies Festival, mixing culture with stargazing. It says the first event of its kind in Scotland, the Hebridean Dark Skies Festival combines stargazing and science talks with film screenings, theatre performances and live music. Really interesting story about that. And if you're in other areas of the world, like Canada or whatever, you might be interested in reading about that and seeing if you can have one in your area. Okay, next story is Tom Walker. It says, Scots Gran is my role model. Brit Award nominee Tom Walker has made a big impact on the music world the past year, but his number one fan is his 81-year-old granny from Scotland. And that's a nice story. Voters are willing to endure a little hardship to be free of the EU. Says Remainers are astonished that so many Brits are relaxed about a no-deal Brexit, but there are two good reasons why, and the article goes through them. Of course, I might add that equally could apply to Scots independence. You know, people are going to be harder up if they get, but if they're willing to be harder up, then, well, that's their decision. The one I found was Ukraine's Lessons for the West. This is a CapX story. Is it time the UK had an alternative, fact-based alternative to Russia today? Really kind of interesting background there. The miracle we all take for granted is the next story. It says between 1990 and 2016, internet access rose from 0 to 46% of the world's population. So I thought you might be interested in that one. Okay, so these are the stories I chose for you this week. And naturally there's plenty more if you click on our Scots News feed link on our index page of Electric Scotland. Tons more, that's just a wee selection of the ones that I put up this week. And on to Electric Canada, Electric Canadian. I'm obviously following up on some regular ones like the Canadian Archive reports. I've got the 1894 one up. Canadian Annual Review of Public Affairs. I've got the issue up for 1917. And I might add that in that particular one there's the account of the Battle of Vimy Ridge, which for Canadians is a very famous battle. Canadian Fisherman, I've got volume 9 up. And the Canadian Horticulturalist, I've got volume 12 for 1889 up. Then I have Ethnic Histories. Canada is a multicultural country with a total population around 36 million, or around 0.5% of the world's population. I added a page for the Jamaicans in Canada this week, and on that page also provided a link to a Jamaican Canadian, Wes Hall, which is a documentary on his life to date, which I enjoyed watching myself, so I hope you might enjoy watching that. He's had quite a life, I tell you. Then Canadian Life and Resources, I've got, this is a monthly view of the development and undeveloped wealth of the Dominion of Canada and Newfoundland. I've got volume 7 up for 1909. I've also put up the Canadian Law Times. I've added volume 2 for 1882, which you can read at one of the links I give you. I've got a few more Canadian Law Times. There's quite a lot of them actually on the internet. I'm going to pick a wee selection and put them up as well in the coming weeks. Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies. As you know, I've been working on the ethnic histories and I've got Ukraine already up, but when I found these several issues, I thought they were really good reading, and I think I got about 5 of them, I think, and I put these up on their page. Then the Beaver. I found 2 copies of the Beaver, which was an in-house magazine for the Hudson's Bay Company. I added these to the footer of our page for the Hudson's Bay. But actually, I read through them both, and I've been that interested that I've actually emailed the historical archivist for the Hudson's Bay Company to see if she's got a resource I can point people to be able to read all the issues, or if she would supply me issues to put up. So we'll see if they get back to me on that. And then finally I've got French River Expedition. It's a great 14-day canoeing and bush trip. So it talks about arriving in Toronto, transport to Petersburg. The day 2 is the Canadian Canoe Museum, and then transport to French River Lodge. Days 3 to 4 are local paddling, expedition preparation and environmental training on the French River. Then days 5 to 12 are a canoe expedition, backcountry camping, rendezvous with the Docus First Nations, paddling the Voyager Channel. And day 13 is the final morning of canoe expedition and returning to French River Lodge with a dinner at night. And then day 14 is transport back to Toronto. But I just thought you might be interested in reading a wee bit more about that. So now, Electric Scotland. I've got the Paisley Family Society of the USA has been in touch, thanks to a wee advert that Beth Gay put into the Best Newfangled Family Tree. And so I've now got a total of 4 issues for you to read. And she's promised to send me any new ones that she puts out, so hopefully that'll be a regular contribution. The Scottish Review. I've added volumes 14 and 15 to her collection. Florence Wilson. I found out more about him, and I've added a link to a PDF containing an article about him. So, interesting character that. The Isle of Skye in 1882 to 1883. This is illustrated by a full report of the trial of the Braes and Glendale Crofters at Inverness in Edinburgh, and an introductory chapter by Alexander Mackenzie, SAA Scott, also a full report of the trial of Patrick Seller in 1883. So, then Clan Leslie Society International, I got in their newsletter for February 2019. Then Andrew Forgay and Margaret Reynolds, a Scots-Irish family in America, and I found a wee PDF file which is quite revealing and interesting, I thought, so I thought I'd put it up on the side. Then Chronicles of Glen Buckie. It's by Henry Johnson in 1889. So as always, it's interesting when you get a book about a small area in Scotland. Then the Celtic Magazine. I've found several new volumes which I've added to our page. I've now got volumes 7, 10, 11, 12, 13 and 19. And all of these, I mean, even reading one volume could take you all day long, so there's a ton of reading there. It's really good reading, a lot of it. Good index page as well. Then I have the Isle of Skye in the Olden Times with the Reverend Alex McGregor. So I've given you a link to that. Charles Morrison is the inventor of the telegraph, and I got a new bit of information in about him, so I've given you a link to read more. William Denny, shipbuilder. I've added this biography to our Significant Scots page, and I've got a wee review of the book up for you to read in this newsletter. It actually says, I read the biographies and never expected to write one. It's Professor Bruce's confession. He has managed to write a biography, however, which is not only readable but also thoroughly attractive, enjoyable and helpful. That is due in a large measure to his own style, and directness of expression may be taken for granted, but it is due in a still larger measure, we believe, to his subject. Mr. Denny was something more than a shipbuilder. He was a man of more than ordinary culture, of intellectual vigour, and of a large, generous and beneficent nature. while devoting himself to his profession with an energy and intelligence which has made his name famous as a shipbuilder. He aimed at playing the part of social reformer in the circle more immediately around him, and hence Professor Bruce has not merely to record his deeds in a master workman and his inventions and triumphs in having naval architecture, he has to trace the history of Mr. Denny's intellectual and spiritual nature, and to say much in respect of his effort, hopes, disappointments and successes in doing good. And it goes on a wee bit longer than that, but that gives you a wee introduction. So well worth biography to read, I would think. And then the story I have for you this week is Settling the West, an immigration to the prairies from 1867 to 1914 by Erica Gagnon, who's a collections researcher. As many of you will know, Canada is considered to be one of the best multicultural countries in the world, and so I felt this story would be a useful article for you to read to understand why this is. And of course, as you read her article, you'll see the sheer amount of people. We've got obviously Belgians, blacks, British people, Scottish people, Irish people, Chinese, Doukhobors, Dutch, Finnish, French, Germans, Hungarians, Hutterites, Icelanders, Jews, Mennonites, Mormons, Poles, Romanians, Scandinavians, Danes, Norwegians, Swedes, Ukrainians, etc., etc., etc. So it just goes to show us quite multicultural, for sure. But it tells you what each of these groups brought to Canada. So anyway, I hope you might enjoy that. And that's basically it. My only wee bit of a rant this week is about the BBC. I'm a bit fed up with the BBC. I think they're anti-British, to be honest with you. But if you read why you should trust the BBC and read it, they talk about impartiality and their neutral stance. Well, their impartial and neutral stance on Brexit is a joke. At least 90% plus of all mention of Brexit is from an anti-Brexit point of view. In my view, there should be a serious investigation into the BBC, and I think that they need to take steps to reduce their power, or certainly reduce public funding, because they're publicly funded. People have to pay a license fee in Britain to view the BBC, and if you don't pay it, you get fined for it. So I think we should be investigating them, and if, as I believe, they've been totally and utterly partial to an anti-Brexit point of view, then I think should be held to account, and I don't think people should be forced to pay the license fee for biased reporting. I'm also pretty fed up with the interviews with politicians and so forth. Clear that anti-Brexit attitude comes through very strongly. They're vicious, nasty people, a lot of these journalists, and I think it's time the politicians stopped craving into them and accused them in these interviews of being totally biased. I think we, as the people of Britain, should be forcing the BBC to retract a lot of the rubbish that they're putting out. I mean, I'm so annoyed about anyone that's anti-anything as strong as they are. I mean, newspapers are meant to be neutral. Yes, I mean, they can be a bit biased towards right and left wing, but you know, strong biases either way is not good for the country. We need to be bringing people together, in my view, and the news medias are not doing it. Journalism is dead, folks, totally dead. At least political stories are dead, that's for sure. I mean, there's no one that's neutral out there you can really trust to read anything. And it's time that we try to get a newspaper to be properly neutral, or a television program to be properly neutral, and then support the hell out of them and close down the rubbish. New York Times, Washington Post, Times, Telegram. I mean, they're all biased in the reporting. And fake news is rife all over the place. Look at the fear stories coming out. They're all total lies, and they've proven to be lies. People are sick fed up of it. And I tell you this much. When it comes to Brexit and people are quite willing to take a hit, financial hit, to get out of the European Union, I think the same applies to Scotland. But I think Scotland needs to be honest with people, and they're not honest. The SNP are never honest with anyone. They're a perfect spin artists. They should tell the people, if you're going to be independent, you're going to be worse off. And this is what we see. But this is how we're going to go through it. Yes, it might take us a decade to get things sorted out. But you know, if you want an independent Scotland, we can do our own thing, then this is what you're going to have to go through to get it. Be honest with us. SNP are liars, cheats, cons, spin artists, everything about it, as are all politicians. I think it's time that we got more active. People that sit back and moan and do nothing should actually not be allowed to even talk about things. Unless you're prepared to do something, just shut up. In other words, join the parties so that when they pick the MP to represent your constituency, you have a voice. And if people have been picked if you look at Labour and Conservative, they both ran on an out of EU ticket. They say we want out of the single market, out of the union, out under the court of the ECJ. I mean, that's what they ran on. And we voted them in on that basis. And how many MPs have reneged on that and now want to remain? These people must be deselected for the next election. Absolutely must be. And if your MP is doing it, you make sure you join that party so that you can go and join Labour, Conservative, SNP, whatever party it is, where that MP for your constituency is not doing what you wanted them to do or what he or she promised to do. Join the relevant party so you can deselect them and make sure you select a member of parliament that will follow what they said they will do. You have the power, but if you're sitting on your backside just moaning, then that's doing absolutely nothing. I can't vote in the Scottish elections because I'm in Canada, but at least I do vote here in Canada, and I've always said if I want to complain, I'll complain because at least I voted. If I didn't vote, I can't complain. I mean, I can complain, but it makes no impact on me because I haven't done anything about it. So, you know, getting active, that's the only way to cure politics, is to get active, to join the parties, and to actually get involved in meetings. So that's my plea for you this week, and it applies to United States, Canada, Britain, anywhere you're living. If you are not satisfied with your politicians, you've got to join the party so you'll be in the mix when you come to selecting the next MP or senator or governor or whatever. But you've got to be active. If you're not active, frankly, you're no use to anyone. So there you go. There's my kind of tip for the future. Get active in your local political parties. Okay, thanks for listening. Hope to hear from you. Cheers. Have a good weekend.